Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Barbara Wells, Hove, and I have the privilege and pleasure of serving as your consulting minister this year. And it's great, as always, to be back among you after a few weeks away, to be here as we gather during the Advent season, acknowledging this time of year as special. The song we just sang, O Come Emmanuel, is considered the oldest Christmas carol, and it's very old, but the words are new, and I think part of what I love about our faith tradition is that we're able to take something really old and make it new. And these words in particular really resonate. I mean, isn't it wonderful to think about all of the ways that the Advent season gets inside of us, that dwells within as love and as hope and as peace and as light to dwell? And so I hope as we celebrate together over the course of this week and into next, that we will feel within the great gift of this season, a gift of waiting, yes, some of us anxiously waiting, as we know, but really the idea that we come together to mark the passage of time, this incredible reality that we live, that we move forward through time, and yet time is always cyclical. Isn't it wonderful to be together again at Christmas? Let's hold that wonder in our hearts and silence our cell phones while we listen to Toby play a beautiful prelude for us.
A few nights ago at dinner, Carla and I were drawing questions from this lovely box here. It's called Greatest Conversation Starters Ever. And it's Christmas themed. So our question that night was, what was your most memorable Christmas gathering? My mind immediately took me to the year our family spent on the farm. This was our property, just a short distance outside of town, where we had begun building, we had a cabin, and it was to become our family home. We made our way to, I was about 8 or 9. We made our way to the cabin on Christmas Eve. It was getting dark, and I remember being worried that it was getting late, worrying about whether Santa was going to find us. The last part of our trip involved a trek through the snow, kind of uphill, pulling our belongings on toboggans. It was a beautiful moonlit night. The silhouette of the trees, I remember very clearly, sparkles in the snow. And I remember the feeling of the rope on my mitts. The 4 of us siblings slept upstairs in one room in our sleeping bags. It was a real adventure. As I look back, I recall the excitement and anticipation of that magical trek. I don't recall the gifts I received, or if we even had a tree in the cabin, although my mom assures me that we did. And so, I dedicate the lighting of our chalice to each of us capturing or recapturing the excitement and magic of the Christmas spirit. We kindle this flame as a symbol of our gathering in the light of understanding. May the warmth of sharing bring us peace.
I invite you, if you choose, to join with me now in a time of prayer or reflection. Gracious One, whom we call by many names, at this season of Advent, we remember this ancient story told again and again, year after year, the story of a child in a family looking for a home. We know that there are children all over our world who are denied homes, who are hungry, who are cold. And we pray that they will find warmth and shelter. We pray that the kings of this world will find their hearts opened and share willingly all that they have with others. We pray for the working people who wonder at the changes that are going on, but are willing to follow a star to see the gift that might lie below. Our own lives can be tender this time of year as we remember times in the past or even now when we are grieving, when we are struggling. Perhaps we have lost hope. And so we pray that the warm and loving spirit that is possible this season will find its way into our hearts, and that we will offer love to the world in generous and kind ways. If there is someone in your life that is struggling, someone whose heart is aching, perhaps that someone is you. If you wish, I invite you to call that person into your mind. And then to call the name of that person, if you wish, into the heart of this beloved community. Let us speak those names now. I light this candle for all those who we have named and all those whose names we do not know, who need to know they are held in the warm embrace of this community. And I light this candle for all the struggling families in the world, but particularly those struggling at our borders who feel that they will never be welcomed. May they someday know that they are indeed welcome home. Let us hold all this in quiet, followed by a time of reflective music. So I have a short reading to share with you, and it's written by Margaret Gooding. Did any of you know Margaret Gooding, Peg Gooding? Ah, yes, and Lynn knew her. She was a Canadian Unitarian religious educator, and I had the privilege of meeting her a couple of times. And she wrote this lovely little piece called Why Not a Star that Sunny will help me with. They told me that when Jesus was born, a star appeared in the heavens above the place where the young child lay.
When I was very young, I had no trouble believing wondrous things. I believed in the star. It was a wonderful miracle, part of a long ago story, foretelling an uncommon life.
They told me a supernova appeared in the heavens in its dying burst of fire.
When I was older and believed in science and reason, I believed the story of the star explained. But I found I was unwilling to give up the star, fitting symbol for the birth of one whose uncommon life has been long remembered.
The star explained became the star understood for Jesus, for Buddha, for Zarathustra.
Why not a star? Some bright star shines somewhere in the heavens each time a child is born.
Who knows what it may foretell?
Who knows what uncommon life may yet again unfold if we but give it a chance.
And let's sing about stars. hymn number 255, There's a Star in the East. For many years, my husband Jocko and I would host a tree trimming party every year. I did this partly because I like to have an excuse to have an event early in the season, but also because in true Tom Sawyer fashion, it's easier to decorate the house and trim the tree if you have help. At one such party, one of my visitors was a 10-year-old boy. He was a great kid, very helpful and full of questions. He's also Jewish. And when he came into my house for my party, the first thing he noticed was that I had not one, but two menorahs alongside my Christmas tree. Why, he asked, do you have menorahs in your house? Aren't you a Christian? Though he was more interested in getting on to the exciting task of decorating a tree, something he'd never done before, I found myself struggling to answer him. For you see, I am not a Christian. I was raised Unitarian, and I have never considered myself a Christian. So why then does Christmas mean so much to me, even if I do have menorahs in my home? Well, I want to thank Asher for his question. It led me to write this sermon, which I gleefully admit I have given before. In fact, I gave it twice at our former church because they asked me to give it again. So you get it this time. Lucky you. Who knows? Maybe you won't feel that way afterwards. Well, the easy answer as to why I celebrate Christmas without being a Christian is that Christmas really isn't a Christian holiday. I mean, most of what we do during the season comes out of the European tradition, which took ancient stories and gave them a Christian gloss. Was Jesus born on December 25th? Well, we don't know, very unlikely, but supposedly the man god Mithras was, and he was the bringer of light. Well, wisely, Christians usurped his birthday and gave it to Jesus, recognizing that celebrating something wonderful at the darkest time of the year just makes sense. Evergreen trees likely come from the Nordic people with Druidic overtones. And if you want to hear a very interesting story, ask me someday about Baldar the Beautiful and why we kiss under the mistletoe. It was my father's favorite story. Well, Santa arrives by sleigh, yes, but historically he comes to us via a Turkish saint, the German god Odin, and the Dutch Sinterklaas. But honestly, the Santa Claus that we know owes far more to the 19th century cartoonist Thomas Nast and the poem "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" than anything else. All the gifts that we give and receive this time of year likely stem from the ancient Roman feast of Saturnalia, celebrated in December with wonderful chaos and bestowal of presents. And don't even get me started on lighting candles. Candles are lit for Hanukkah, solstice, and the Indian Festival of Lights, Diwali, just to name a few. Yes, it certainly can be argued that Christmas is mostly non-Christian as a holiday. And like most people in North America, I'm generally content to just enjoy the beauty and fun of it all and leave it at that. And yet, the story that springs from the Christian scriptures of Jesus' birth in Bethlehem compels me. Why, I ask myself, do I, as a Unitarian Universalist, a non-Christian no less, find this story so meaningful? Why do I continue year after year to preach and reflect on the meaning of Christmas to us today? I was never able to satisfactorily answer that question until I stumbled upon a little book written by Karen Armstrong called A Short History of Myth. Have any of you read it? Ooh, you have a great opportunity. Unlike most of Karen Armstrong's books, which are the kind that, they're great, but they're a little intense. This one's like this, super easy to read. It's great. She is one of the greatest religious thinkers writing today, and I had the privilege of meeting her once. I was practically like, ooh, because, I don't have many heroes in that world, but she's one of them. Anyway, A Short History of Myth is a very interesting book. It's indeed short, and in its few chapters, it helps the reader understand why and how myth has shaped our species since humans first became human. Now, myth, Karen Armstrong reminds us, is not a lie or a fiction, though we often use that word to describe something that we believe to be untrue. Myth, according to her, is all about truth. But it's about finding truth inside a story, a symbol, or a ritual. Myths help us understand ourselves because they take the big questions of meaning and hope, life and death, and give them shape. Now, humans have, for thousands of years, used mythical stories to help us understand the psyche. Long before psychology, modern or otherwise, myths were used, for example, to guide young people through the separation that comes from adulthood and marriage. Think of the myth of Demeter and Persephone. Or to help us understand why bad things happen, Pandora's box. Armstrong argues strongly that these ancient people never saw these myths as fact. Instead, she believes that people understood that the truth found in these ancient myths was spiritual truth. Jews, for example, did not have to believe that the Red Sea actually parted to recognize the power of a story that allowed captive people to escape from bondage. Today, however, we have moved away from understanding ancient stories through a mythical lens and instead want them to be either fact or false. As Armstrong writes in her book, when we hear of gods walking the earth, of dead men striding out of tombs, or of seas miraculously parting to let a favored people escape from their enemies, we dismiss these stories as incredible and demonstrably untrue. Since the 18th century, we have developed a scientific view of history. We are concerned above all with what actually happened. But in the pre-modern world, when people wrote about the past, they were more concerned with what an event might have meant. A myth was an event which, in some sense, had happened once, but which also happened all the time. These words ring powerfully true when thinking about Christmas. Here we are, 2,000 years since the events which we read about in the Bible were supposed to have happened. And we still tell the story over and over and over again. Why? Well, I think we do so because it's such a powerful myth that it refuses to just go away, even though it cannot ever be proven to be true, to be fact. And yet people do try to prove it to be fact. Fundamentalists get upset when people gently suggest, maybe there weren't three kings. Maybe the shepherds didn't see any angels. Even worse, when biblical scholars say that Jesus wasn't even born in Bethlehem, but in Nazareth, heresy. But lest you think the fundamentalists dwell only to our right, let me remind us gently that we can get caught up in calling the myth a fiction and jettisoning it altogether. Some years ago, the American Atheist put up a billboard just outside the Lincoln Tunnel in New York City, which showed a picture very like the one on the cover of today's order of service. So take a look at the cover and you'll see, typical nativity scene. The huge caption underneath it read, "You know it's a myth." To which I want to respond, Duh. Interestingly, the Catholics put up another billboard, same picture, different message. Theirs said, "You know it's real." To which I respond, yes, at least in some ways. It's just this kind of ridiculous argument that makes me want to pull out my hair this time of year. While some conservative Christians get all upset that we've taken Jesus out of the season with all our evergreens and Santas and such, I have heard Unitarians say with conviction that we can't celebrate Christmas unless we believe Jesus was born of a virgin on on December 25th. To both, I say, along with the great Unitarian Ebenezer Scrooge, bah humbug. Better yet, let me share a short poem written many years ago by my colleague John Corrado, and I invite Sonny to help me.
'Twas the night before Christmas, and all the UUs were desperately trying to pick and to choose what parts of the holiday they could still use and not fudge on tenets or liberal views. Some folks who call themselves quite Unitarian think that a Christmas with Christ is barbarian.
Mangers with beasties and angels and that may be accepted, and very old hat, but I'm a thinker who buys none of that. A virgin, 3 wise men, that star in the east may impress some, but not me in the least. I opt for reason and things that make sense, so Christmas for me must be all relevance. Comparative religious studies, they charm us. They're distant, don't touch us, don't scare or alarm us. If Christmas were Hindu or Buddhist or Zen, we could safely believe in it then.
Hearing such drivel, I retch and I cry. Take pen in hand and write this reply. Come now, you stodgy and humbug old skeptic. Your views are quite silly and too antiseptic. You too are a part of the world that you live in. Don't be so uptight. Relax now and give in. If you're a liberal poobah, you'll fear it. But Christmas is mainly a time of the Spirit.
Thank you, Sonny, for helping me share a wonderful poem. It's one of those poems that the first time I read it, I was like, oh, I resemble that remark. Well, John wrote this wonderful poem, and it reminds us that if we fall into the trap of trying to make the Christmas story literal fact, then reject it because it doesn't make sense, we're losing something precious, a myth that still resonates powerfully today, even after 2,000 years of telling. When I read Karen Armstrong's little book, I realized that the reason Christmas means something to me year after year is that it is one terrific myth. And we in our culture and time are badly in need of positive myths that touch our hearts and urge us toward the good. Over the last few hundred years, we have turned away from myth, expecting science to explain everything, even mystery, which is our theme of this month. Though science has brought amazing advances, when applied to religion, it inadvertently brought about a fundamentalism of the left and the right. As Karen Armstrong says, when you start reading the stories of Genesis and the Gospels through the light of science, you have bad science and bad religion. And bad religion is what the 20th century was all about, and things aren't that much better in the 21st. The religious impulse has far too often been usurped by those who understand the power of myth and use them for nefarious ends. I mean, think of the myth of the Nazis for one just terrible example. As Armstrong writes, these destructive mythologies have been narrowly racial, ethnic, denominational, and egotistic, an attempt to exalt the self by demonizing the other. We see this in the ways that the Christian, Muslim, and Jewish myths have been warped to allow people to kill each other in the name of God. Armstrong challenges us to return to myth, but with a new understanding for our times. We need myths, she writes, that help us to identify with our fellow human beings. We need myths that help us to realize the importance of compassion. We need myths to help us to create a spiritual attitude. We need myths that help us to venerate the earth as sacred again. Well, I believe the Christmas story is that kind of myth. It's the myth of a king who turns out to be the son of peasants born in a barn. That reminds us that the circumstances of birth have no bearing on who we become. A powerful truth so needed today. It's the myth of a family that cares for one another, even when others around them vilify their choices. And that reminds us to be strong in our commitments to each other and to those we love. It's a myth about people from all walks of life, kings and shepherds, rich and poor, who are willing to change their lives when they discover something more meaningful on their path. It's the myth of a shining star in the night, reminding us to look closely even into the dark places of our lives to see what might be illuminated there. The Christmas story has been told for 2,000 years. It has been recast, set in Africa, Mexico, and even in a memorable play I helped produce years ago in Darrington, Washington. It has been reinterpreted for different generations through paintings, stories, and of course, songs. And if you didn't see them all in the Night Visitors yesterday, I urge you to come today. It's such a wonderful telling it's a lens into the Christmas story. It's very beautiful. Well, like all good myths, the Christmas story doesn't take place just once, but over and over again as people all over the world wonder at a tiny baby who grows up to change the world, and they ask themselves, how might I make a difference? I don't care a whit if Jesus was born in a barn or in a cave, in April or December, in Bethlehem or Nazareth. It doesn't bother me that in Luke there are shepherds and in Matthew there are kings. If you want to tell the story with both of them, go for it. I don't need to know if the star was a supernova or a miraculous occurrence. And it doesn't concern me in the least to understand that Jesus was a man just like any other, and to also know that he, like all of us, was a child of God. I love Christmas because the older and maybe wiser I get, the more I realize that we humans desperately need stories that touch our hearts and help us grow our souls. We need myths that teach us to care more deeply for one another and to trust that we will have faith, hope, and love enough to build a better world. There just aren't that many myths left out there for us to believe in. So I'm not giving up on the Christmas story. It's my myth, and I'm sticking to it. As we move deeper into this season, I challenge you, as my colleague Ed Searle once wrote, to banish cynicism and welcome wonder. Lose yourself in the Christmas myth and find yourself in it too. That's what makes it such a great myth. You can play any part in it you choose. So let me leave you with these words written by Edward Erickson as a reminder to each and all that the myths we cherish are true because we live in them and they live in us. And I invite Sunny to help me again.
If, as Herod, we fill our lives with things and again things,
if we consider ourselves so important that we must fill every moment of our lives with action,
When will we have time to make the long, slow journey across the burning desert as did the Magi?
Or sit and watch the stars as did the shepherds?
Or to brood over the coming of the child as did Mary?
For each one of us, there is a desert to travel, a star to discover, and a being within ourselves to bring to life. Let us bring our own lives into focus through the lens of Christmas. It's a myth worth sharing, a myth worth participating in, a myth worthy of the name. And it's a myth that reminds us to create together a better world. Hymn writer and 19th century Unitarian minister Edmund Hamilton Sears used the Christmas story as a lens on his own era, which was also a time of war and strife like our own. His words, though written over 150 years ago, still ring true today. So let's sing together, "It Came Upon the Midnight Clear." It's hymn 244 in your hymnal.
We extinguish this flame,
But
carry with us
the light of vision and the warmth of hope.
The world calls us to live with depth, meaning, and purpose.
Let us go forth with courage and love. Let us open our hearts then to the mystery and wonder of the season, recognizing how much we need light and joy, food and fellowship, faith, hope, and love during this dark time. And may we learn to sing that glorious song of old with all our hearts, that someday our world will find peace on earth and goodwill toward all. Until then, we find it here when we circle round, remembering that all are welcome into this community of care. I invite you to reach out to your neighbor and hold hands while we sing together, Circle Around for Freedom.